A concrete walkway that the association is responsible for. Periodically, sections of that will require replacement. We have funds in for common area drainage improvements. We have funds in for refurbishing, I think it was a gravel walking trail. We have funds in, there's a wood pedestrian bridge. We have funds in the first year for replacing the decking and railings on that bridge. And then longer term funds for full replacement of that bridge. Again, same type of stuff with repair and painting of the gazebos, the entrance features with the landscape lighting and irrigation systems. We have funds in for repairing those systems periodically as well. Again, major repairs that's not going to be typically covered under an annual contract with a maintenance provider. Soccer goals, and then also there's trash cans and benches and picnic tables, a whole bunch of other kind of site furniture that we've allocated funds for repairs periodically. The largest one by far, and probably what makes us most nervous for your community, is regarding the pond. So the pond is an old farm pond, so it's been here long before the community was ever developed. When that pond was originally built, more than likely some old farmer that needed a stock pond or a place to store some water for whatever he's using on his farm. And it doesn't appear that it was ever engineered or designed to have proper outlet structures and a proper earthen dam. Probably a farmer that put together this pond, and it has worked. I mean, in his defense, however many 60 years ago, whenever he built it, it has worked up until this point. Some of the things that make us nervous about that pond, woody vegetation, so tree growth on the earthen dam. So the far side of that pond, the water comes in on one side. The far side of that pond, there's what we call an earthen dam, basically just dirt piled up to create a dam. We don't like to see woody vegetation, any significant tree root growth growing on that pond. If anybody's lived through a hurricane and you've seen a tree topple over and you've seen the size of the root ball of dirt that it pulls out with it, if something like that was to happen with one of those trees, it's going to take a large chunk of that earth that's holding that water back with it. The pond also doesn't have, it doesn't look like the outlet structure. There's a cross pipe, a little plastic, it's called HDPE, high density polyethylene. There's a plastic pipe as a cross pipe as a drainage, but it doesn't look like that is nearly adequate for the drainage area that is feeding that pond. It likely wasn't designed based on an inundation map or a drainage area of how much water would be feeding that pond. We also don't want to see it overtop the earthen dam. So anytime water rolls over the top of an earthen dam, it's going to create erosion. It's going to start pulling that dirt with it when it overtops an earthen dam. Those types of things make us nervous when we're looking long term, next 30 years with this community. Yes, this pond's been here for 60 years, but 2 days ago in our office, Chris Fleith was with another community in Cary. In the storms we had in late September, I think it was the first leg of rain that came through, then followed by some of those hurricane remnants that came through that one day. They had water overtopping one of their farm ponds that had been there forever and started overtopping, started eroding the backside of that dam pretty badly. If you Google pond dam collapse in North Carolina, you'll find several stories about ponds, old farm ponds where the earthen dams have completely collapsed over time. How we are addressing that for you guys is predominantly recommending a full engineering study of that earthen dam and the pond itself. So that would basically be two components. You would have, number one, a land development site civil engineering firm come in, and they're going to do inundation mapping. So they're going to map the drainage area. What all is feeding to this pond? How much water is this pond taking during certain storm events? When we get 1 inch of rainfall versus 15 inches of rainfall, how much water is going into this pond? That study helps with two things. Number one, identifying what size outlet structure would be most appropriate to contain that, what type of secondary, and then also what type of secondary spillways might be needed to protect that dam from water overtopping that. The second part of this analysis would include what's called a geotechnical evaluation. So you would have basically dirt engineers, guys that really love dirt. They would do borings into the pond to check to make sure you don't have water already seeping through it. So if you had trees that die and the roots have deteriorated, you're creating what's called piping, where you have sections where those tree roots have grown through that pond to try to find water, and then they die and they shrivel up, and now you have little holes, places that water can start seeping through an earthen dam. If you get a lot of water seeping through an earthen dam, it's going to start pulling the dirt with it, and it's going to start washing out from the backside of that dam, and again, potentially causing failure. They would also look at the tree root growth, do an analysis of the trees and types of trees and types of dirt, what types of dirt in that pond to help develop recommendations for exactly how the trees should be removed, which ones should be removed, and what types of repairs would be needed with the actual earthen dam structure itself. Not as worried. There's a potentially third potential risk with this, but I'm not, from a rough look at it, I'm not as worried for you guys. The state of North Carolina rates all earthen dams, or really all lakes and the dam structures throughout North Carolina. And they basically give it 3 levels of hazard. It's either a high, medium, or low hazard dam. That hazard rating doesn't have anything to do with the condition of the dam. That hazard rating is 100% based on what happens if it fails. So a high hazard dam would mean that there is a life safety concern if this dam fails. There's somebody living or working or playing somewhere directly below it, right? From a rough look at it, I don't think you have any worry about that. A medium hazard dam would be, there's gonna be some damage to some infrastructure. We're gonna hit a road, we're gonna hit a bridge, the water might damage, possibly run up to somebody's foundation wall, might cause some sort of structural damage, but not likely a life safety thing. About 6 or 7 years ago, they triggered a new state of North Carolina requirement that all medium hazard dams had to start requiring this emergency action plan and full inundation mapping and a whole bunch of engineering stuff that you have to pay consultants for to develop this emergency action plan. It's basically, during a storm event, somebody has to inspect it. This is who's going to be inspecting it. If they see certain things, they have to call this person, who has to call this person, who has to notify this whole like phone tree type thing. And that has to be updated annually. And then to develop that in the first place, you have to go through that inundation mapping process. And a lot of communities were hit with that about 6 or 7 years ago when they changed that hazard rating, and it included any roadways, because a lot of dams that had roads on top of them were not included in that. And then they changed the law and it became included in that. And then it just triggered this $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of expense that these associations had to pay to get all this work done, really not doing anything, but just paying consultants to come out and look at it and develop this emergency action plan. That is a possibility with yours. I mean, looking at it, there is a little bit of infrastructure downstream. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm certainly not going to guarantee that's not going to happen. If the association didn't do the emergency action plan, the state of North Carolina would ultimately start fining the association, and at some point would probably force the removal of the dam at some point if you didn't pay the fine. So it would go through this process. So we have put in $80,000 for engineering evaluations for that earthen dam around that pond. Our recommendation is to do that as soon as you can afford it. The sooner the better, to get a better idea of the hazard classification of that dam, what's feeding into it, what should the outlet structure look like, is the tree growth that problematic? If it is, which trees to remove, how to repair that earthen dam to avoid any possible further risks in it. Any engineer that you talk to out there would come look at the dam and tell you, look, earthen dams, woody vegetation, bad. Old pond, doesn't have a traditional or designed outlet structure, there's no secondary spillway, bad, right? So any engineer that comes to look at this is going to say the same general things that we have said, that these are problem areas with this earthen dam. So it's something we want to make sure is kind of front and center, that the board knows about, that the association knows about, and we've put in a significant amount of funds for that evaluation. Depending on what they find, it could result in much more substantial repairs. If they found some seepage through that dam and they found some bad soils and the outlet structure is completely undersized and you had to rebuild that entire earthen dam, that would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, I would be surprised if you got it out of that under like $300,000 to $400,000. There'd be an exhaustive permitting process. It would take a long period of time. That's all the other items in here. You're in a decent spot. You do need to make some increases in the reserve contributions to fund all those other items completely. But that earthen dam and that pond is probably is really the primary driver behind what our funding recommendations ended up being for this community. So we look at all the expenses that you have over the next 30 years, averaging out with inflation, totaling over the next 30 years, again, including inflation. It's going to be a big number. 30 years worth of 4% average inflation rate comes up at $833,000 over the next 30 years. That averages out to $34,000 per year. So over the next 30 years, we're estimating you to spend on average $34,000 a year. You're currently putting in $700 a year. So there's a gap, right? You're not setting aside enough funds to do all the repairs of all the common elements and all the things that we've anticipated, in addition to doing that more exhaustive study on that earthen dam and that pond project as well. So then based on that information, we made some funding recommendations. One of those funding recommendations was basically to a really sharp increase in those reserve contributions in the very first year. I think we recommended going up by $40 or $45 per unit per month in the first year into that reserves. So just 40 or 45 bucks going into reserves, additional amount in the very first year. Again, that is to plan for these major expenses that are coming down the road, so that when those expenses happen, you're not going to need a special assessment. So the communities that we work with that run out of funds, right? So some big project needs to happen and there's not enough funds in the reserve account. You basically have three options when you get to that point. Number one, you do a special assessment. So you go through a vote, you charge each homeowner $2,000 or $4,000 or $5,000, or some of the coastal high rises, it's like 20 grand, but that's a whole different story in the condo world. But we want to avoid that special assessment, having to go through that special assessment process. The other option would be to get a loan. So certain projects you can get loans for. I don't think you're gonna get a loan to do any earth and dam projects. I don't think the banks are willing. Have you ever seen a bank do that? I know they do it for like asphalt paving and townhouse roof replacements and exterior painting projects. I'm not aware that I've seen a bank loan on an earth and dam project. Might be able to get a loan from a bank. The HOA would get a loan from a bank. And then the very next year, you have a new line item on your budget because now you have a loan payment that you need to add to that very next year budget. The third option is one of the more common options, and that is to do nothing, to kick the can down the road, to let the walking trail go into disrepair and basically abandon it, let the pedestrian bridge collapse, like whatever else, save every nickel you can because you don't have enough money to fix whatever the amenities are. Worst case scenario, possibly even just letting the earth and dam fail and you don't have any money to replace it, and then you now have a creek bed with a kind of swampy, muddy area around it as opposed to a pond. Our goal is to provide the information for the board to make a decision and the HOA to make a decision to fund those reserves in advance to avoid you from getting into those situations. Again, we covered everything. I mean, there's a whole bunch of expenses on here. You can look through it. I think it's page 2 of Appendix A, kind of details out all the different components. Near term, we did see some concrete flat work issues. We've got several grand for that. We have some common area drainage systems. So in addition to the pond, you have some other swales that are providing drainage in the common areas. We don't look at drainage systems on individual lots because that is not common area. The HOA doesn't maintain that. We're only looking at drainage systems on common area property that is owned by the association. We also have bathymetry for the stormwater pond. So that's measuring, or for the large farm pond, that's measuring the amount of sediment that's accumulating. Over time, sediment will accumulate in that pond from runoff, from leaf litter, from just anything, dirt, anything else that's going in that pond. Over time, sediment will accumulate at the bottom of that pond and require dredging at some point as well. The bathymetry is where they go and they check the bottom. They go through the pond, they go around the pond in a boat and looking at the level of sediment that's in the bottom of that pond to help better predict dredging needs down the road as well. We've got funds in again for the walking trail refurbishment, the wood bridge we talked about. Really the only major near term, the near term ones are the wood, replacing decking railings at the wood bridge, the minor areas of concrete repair, and then some common area drainage improvements. But again, that full engineering analysis of that earth and dam and that pond, we would recommend doing that as soon as you can afford it. We have, I think, year 8 there in here, but that's more to buy you some time to save some money to get there. You only had like 34 grand or something in the reserve account now. So we're buying you a little bit of time. But the moment that you can afford to do that, the better off you'll be from a long-term planning perspective. So yeah, I know it feels like it's not good news. There needs to be more money put into reserves. A lot of it is for this pond that some farmer built many years ago that a developer has transitioned over to us and doesn't technically meet current design standards for that pond. I know a lot of it's not good news. We're really just here to analyze the data, look at the facts based on our experience with similar communities and similar properties, help provide a report that at least gives you a guideline for how to fund the reserve account for the next 30 years to plan for those expenses. Questions, comments?
So I understood you correctly. You're saying this pond has been in place for over 60 years.
I'd have to go back and double check the historical aerials exactly, but it was here long before the community was developed.
All right, so keeping that in mind, some of us, I'm just looking around the room, have been in this neighborhood for 15 years or so, even before HOA was started. I personally, because I'm close to the lake, you guys are the closest, I guess. Of the setbacks we have had with that pond, they have not lasted very long. And fortunately, Mother Nature works in our favor and comes back and restores that pond levels. Me personally, it's nice to have, but look how many years it's been there. And we have not had any significant setbacks so far, because Mother Nature comes in and restores those pond levels back to the normal levels again.
I'm more worried about the earthen dam than the level of the water, but yes, I get what you're saying. It has been there for a really long time. We're more worried about that earthen dam. If you get too much water, what's gonna happen?
Which has not happened so far.
Yep.
Yeah, the earthen dam usually floods into Mark's yard. So when there's flooding, it goes into my neighbor's yard. It does. I've never seen water, even during a bad storm, and about maybe over that pipe or at that pipe, but
Sure.
Mark's yard, it flows back into his yard.
You guys get it too?
No.
How is it possible that any of this was approved when the development went up?
We have the exact same question.
And
Yeah, I mean, it's,
were there, I mean, obviously things
Yeah.
have changed where now the earth and dam
well,
has to.
we are working with another community right now outside of Wake Forest that is transitioning from, they're a brand new community, just brand newly developed. And there is an existing pond there that has wood, massive trees on it that doesn't have any controlled outlet structure. And it has been, the site plan has been approved. And we are consulting with the HOA, hey, before you take ownership of this, you need to be addressing all of this because this is not good. Why are the municipalities allowing it? Yeah, that's.
Well, how can they come back and enforce any codes if they allowed it to occur in the first place?
So I think part of the municipality's argument is going to be is we allow houses that were built in the 1800s that don't meet any of our current codes to remain in place.
Yeah, yeah.
They haven't fallen,
Yeah.
not an imminent life safety issue.
Well,
I mean, maybe we come in and condemn it if there is an imminent life safety issue. So if I'm in the municipality's perspective, maybe there's some logic behind not an imminent life safety issue. It was there long before we required any design work to be done around this thing. I mean, I'm attempting to speak for somebody else's perspective, but that is a great question. Ask your town council.
Well, we don't belong to it.
Or
Belongs to the county.
ask the county, ask the, yeah.
It's Wake County.
Yeah, ask your county officials. That is a great question. Go serve on that, yeah, go get
And
elected.
by the time the 8th year comes around when we need it, we'll probably have an answer by then too.
Yeah.
And there's no way to go after the builder.
Number one, I'm not an attorney. As I understand, statute of limitations in North Carolina generally starts expiring like around year 7.
They didn't do anything wrong.
No.
I mean,